And welcome to this video. My name is Janis, and maybe you're new here because this is my first Syntakt video, which is why I'm really excited about it. I'm still on my way to learn the Elektron workflow, navigating on the device. I'm still a bit slow, but I'm getting there. But a video I thought I can already make is how it interacts with the Nord drum, because I'm a drummer, I use my Nord drum all the time, and looking at those two instruments, it actually looks like some pretty sweet DAWless setup. So I want to check out how the Nord drum can trigger sounds on the Syntakt, how the Syntakt can sequence the Nord drum, which is actually incredibly powerful, and also what other possibilities there are for modulating sounds or having some sort of interaction between the both devices. And also if you're using, for example, some Digitakt or you have the Nord drum and want to play some other synthesizer, the video should help you because you will see the potential limitations but also the possibilities. And as I mentioned, this is going to be some DAWless video, so I'm not going to use Ableton Live. However, throughout the video you will see that I will make some comments about how Ableton Live would actually help in this specific moment for getting more expression possibilities or just more variety. Alright, let's jump right into it. For controlling the sounds on the Syntakt with the Nord drum, you need to use the global MIDI channel, which you'd find under Shift and MIDI. And 14 is the most universal setting because it means that you select the track on the Syntakt. So if I want to play sound number 9, I just have to select it here, or sound 2. So you don't have to do anything on the Nord drum, but alternatively you can also change it here by just selecting, for example, channel 1, which is going to be sound 1, or then sound 2. And here's some cool sound I found on the Syntakt with the PC Carbon engine, which is actually for creating percussion sounds, and this is also what I tried to create, but turns out it can sound super cool as some sort of dark, distorted synthesizer. I'm going to switch the global MIDI channel on the Nord drum back to 14 because I prefer to choose the tracks on the Syntakt itself. And I want to play a short jam for you that shares with you the workflow so you can see how it looks like to record stuff and to actually play stuff with some external controller. And this is really fun, although it looks more simple than it is because there are quite some limitations regarding the recording mode. So right now I had the recording mode on all the time, but it also meant that I had to nail any part as a first take because it immediately records the loop once you start playing. And in some kind of more improvised setting or some open setting where you maybe start playing some figures and at a certain point you feel like that's it, you want to record it, you actually need to stop and go to the Syntakt and press those two buttons because it's kind of a tricky move. And there's unfortunately no possibility to assign some MIDI control for that. Also, you saw that there was some sequence already in the beginning, so I didn't play the first part, which is because there's a click track that gets sent out through the output, and because there's just one output, in case you're playing for people or somebody's listening to you, they're also going to hear the click track, which is kind of a not so great experience for the audience. So if you play stuff, it's kind of a smart idea to start with some sequence, some musical sequence that is existing already and that gives you some clear timing so you can jump onto that. And since we're already speaking about some limitations, the Nord drum can only send out MIDI globally, which is a big limitation because here you saw that the kick, the snare, the hi-hat, wherever you put them, they all have individual MIDI channels. And you can only send out one MIDI channel on the Nord drum, which means you can still play like tuned kick drums, but you can't play kits with like kick, snare, hi-hat, at least not on the Syntakt. And this is where Ableton would help a lot because you can send in the MIDI from the Nord drum and then just transform it. So you can send it to other channels, other values. You're really flexible and you can also store different presets that lets you immediately change to maybe different scales and stuff. I think it's super powerful. And since the Nord drum doesn't have any of those features, you can only change the MIDI notes internally, but that's also kind of hassle. Like if you're in some live situation, I don't feel like you want to spend time going through the MIDI menu here and changing the MIDI values, also because you see the value, not the exact note. It's not the most organic feeling thing. So yeah, let me know also if you feel like, okay, it would be really interesting to see the setup with Ableton, because if you write it down in the comments, I can consider making a video about it as well. And that's pretty much what you can do with the Nord drum as a MIDI controller. You see, there are not so many options. You can send out different notes, but not even different channels. And for getting more out of it, you definitely need Ableton Live. But what's really interesting in this setup is when you record it onto a MIDI track of the Syntakt. So right now on track 7, I have a MIDI track and it sends to channel 14 because the Nord drum is still on 14. And now I can play a sequence on the Nord drum, record it with the Syntakt, and then it will continue sequencing the Nord drum so I can start messing with some parameters. And here's a little example of that. And I really love this because it's so fun to mute steps of a sequence you played and turn it into something else, or to use the probability. Those are modes that I absolutely enjoy using. And you can go even further, because if you check those other pages here, you can add some CC values. Actually, here I did this already, but by default it looks like this, and you have to press function and this knob to activate it. Then you have a CC knob, and on the amp page you can set a destination. And usually on every manual of any type of synthesizer, there's a list somewhere that tells you on which MIDI values it receives the MIDI information. Also in the Nord drum manual, you can find this type of list. And it says that, for example, for changing the cutoff frequency, you need to send stuff on value CC 52. So here I switched this to 52, which means if I play the sequence now, I can change the cutoff frequency. And you can set up to 8 parameters per MIDI track and even modulate one with some LFO, which is super powerful and we'll get more into in a second. But you also saw that for this type of patch, there's another limitation, because we can only change the value of individual pads, so whatever pad is selected here. And this is great if you have different functions per pad. Again, I'll show you some example in a second. But if you have this melodic patch where you have the same sound for all pads and want to play melodies, it's a bit limiting, and there's no other channel where you can send MIDI to where it changes the value for all pads, not even if you press shift and edit all channels. And here we could need help from Ableton again, because there's some great Max for Live Ableton device from a friend, Toby, aka Ableton Drummer, a Nord drum manager, that actually lets you control the parameters from inside Ableton Live, but also lets you change the parameters for all pads at once. And you could actually set it up in a way that you use the Syntakt knobs as a MIDI controller for this control inside Ableton, and then you can actually change globally the filter cutoff frequency, for example. Again, if this sounds interesting, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, here's a video where I speak about this manager. Now, the most fun part with this type of setup probably doesn't include any type of drumming, because it's using the Syntakt as a sequencer and addressing all those 6 pads of the Nord drum individually. Because you can do that by setting up 6 MIDI tracks, and so you see track 1 is sending MIDI to channel 1, track 2 to MIDI channel 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6. Meaning that on pad 1 I have a kick drum, pad 2 is bass, pad 3 is snare, hi-hat, pad 4 some sort of melody, pad 5 some sort of pad, and pad 6 some sort of percussion. And you can play all those different pads chromatically. So if I go to this melodic sound and use the keyboard here, you see that I can play melodies. And that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to record some beat using all those 6 pads individually, sometimes also with chromatic melodies. And afterwards, I'll show you some super cool ideas on how you can modulate parameters with LFOs, but also recording some automation. Now, this sounds fun, but a little static, so let's actually use some of the CC parameters for bringing in more movement to the sound. And right now I only have the kick and the bass activated. And want to give you some examples. So for example, I selected on the amp page, this is, actually, which one is it? 52. So here we can change the cutoff frequency of the bass sound. And this one is 50, which is the decay. Those are 2 cool examples. And we have one LFO, which means we can modulate one of those parameters with some LFO, which is incredibly cool. So you can actually have some LFO for the Nord drum. And let's check some destinations. For example, CC2 value is the decay. So let's have some, it's already selected, some random LFO sending out random values of the decay. And while you have only one LFO, you can also record different CC values into the sequencer. So it's basically like some automation. So let's actually try this. So that's actually quite powerful, and imagine that you can do this for 8 different values. One of them you can modulate through some LFO, or if maybe you only want to use one MIDI track for sequencing something, then you can use all those other MIDI tracks on the same channel for using LFOs as well. So if you're only using one sequence for maybe one instrument that receives just this one sequence, you can use all those other tracks without sending a sequence to just modulate parameters or for sending out LFOs. So that's actually incredibly powerful. And for the hi-hat, for example, I think I also use some random LFO that modulates CC value 2, which is probably the decay. Here you can also see the value move. So now I'm on the hi-hat channel, and you can see that the decay value will slightly change. And there's also a tiny modulation for the resonance of the filter, which is value, let's check it, 17. For the melodic sound, which is on channel 4, it's super cool to add some random panning, because if you go to the menu here, you can also select pan as a destination. It's channel 10. So this is on CC value 1, and this one we modulate again with some random LFO. Here I like to choose the mode which is trigger hold, because it only sends out one random value until the next note gets triggered. And this is how it sounds like. Actually, I need to change this to the middle position, because then the LFO is the most efficient, then it will equally distribute the signal left and right. For the pad sound, I didn't use any CC modulation, but I was using some super cool sequencer feature called trigger conditions that I also want to share with you, because it allows you to add more variety to your sequences. And it sounds like they are basically longer than just the amount of steps that you select on the Syntakt. So this actually has all 4 pages. But if you check, for example, this step, it says condition for 4, which means out of 4 times that it runs through the whole sequencing cycle, it will only play this note or trigger this step the 4th time. So the 3 times before, we're not going to hear it. And the same for this one. And I think on the second page, I have 2 steps that trigger the second out of 2 times. So the sequence that has like 4 pages, 64 steps, is 4 times as long if you listen to it, because there's always going to be a slight variation. So just take a listen. Here we had 2 more notes. Now we have all triggers. And for the last pad, this percussion sound, I basically added some panning again, and also this time I changed the spectra, which is value 30. And for this one, I think I recorded some automation while the LFO modulates the panning. Let's check it out. And overall, yeah, you see it's some really powerful setup, even without the computer, and especially if you're only looking for sequencing stuff. And that's a bit the thing for me, because while all this LFO, automation stuff, modulating stuff on the Nord drum is super fun, it's still a drum pad, and I'm a drummer. And if I only use a drum pad, seeing all those pads for sequencing, I feel like something's missing, and I want to still play drums. And for playing drums, I don't want to miss Ableton Live, because otherwise the MIDI control functions are really limited. And if I bring in Ableton Live, I can set up my own kits, also for some potential layering. I can change the articulation, like have different note lengths, for example, or store different or save different templates for different types of scales and notes. And there's just so much fun stuff I can do when I bring in Ableton Live. And there's something else I didn't mention yet, which is Overbridge, which is something from Elektron that lets you via USB record all the Syntakt tracks individually, which you can also use once you bring in Ableton Live. So you have more flexibility for sure. And again, if this sounds like some interesting video topic to me, having this setup with Ableton Live, let me know in the comments. There's a video though that you can already check out where I explain how you can set up hybrid patches inside Ableton Live. I'll link it here. And if you're looking for some more musical inspiration for sequencing, check out this video. It's some super fun trick. Apart from that, I wish you lots of inspiration with whatever it is that you create and hope to see you soon again at this channel. Bye.